calamity upon himself by arousing the ire of the Pharisees and those who kept that system going, the high priests whose domain it was. If that was the zeal that the Lord had for his Father's house with regard to the temple and its worship, which was only a foreshadowing of what we have, what would he say now? We have actually regressed compared with the respect that the Jews had at the time of the temple, which had only just been completed. It's a huge affair. I'm thinking of some signs, because they're wanting a sign, which would indicate that for our time. Just there on the wall is the picture of little Jacinta, the youngest canonized saint, not a martyr. She was only 9 when she died. And she, before petering out in the hospital in Lisbon, was given some extra bits that people know less about. They all know about the apparitions at Fatima itself, but not all have realized that it didn't quite stop there. Our Lady made it known to her that her Divine Son did not want people talking in the chapel. She mentioned it, and it fell on deaf ears. Now, she was only a child, but she had the courage to get the message on paper and send it to the Cardinal Archbishop of Lisbon as Our Lady's express wish. She was also given to understand that one sin was particularly displeasing to heaven. It was the sin against purity. I mentioned that in the context of the Decalogue that we've just had in the first reading, because one of them specifically has to do with it, adultery, and the other also at the end has to do with it with regard to coveting one's neighbour's wife. Nowadays that is rampant, not always in fulfillment, but in desire and in provocation. And marriage right now is often under threat because either the husband or the wife is looking at things on the privacy of their screen. Now this is for the wife, for instance, a virtual adultery. If she knows that her husband is looking at other people, it's not fair on the wife. And it's happening all over the place right now if you look around or if you open your ears. It's virtual adultery. And by the way, it might be nearer to us than we think. One cannot right now passively put on an active television channel, unfiltered, and expose ourselves to what might just like that come out of the screen. It's quite different from watching something that one has already chosen and prepared. For instance, a safe YouTube for information. It's a different ball game. One cannot just open live television now because it's an occasion of sin. Beware, and you parents be doubly aware, because you're responsible for your children's eyes. What goes in stays in. But I come back to this one. The question of honouring the house of God and the one who inhabits it. Some years ago, there was a good holy priest who had locked up after praying quietly before the tabernacle in the church, and he went to bed. Now, he was in his room some time later, and he hadn't gone to sleep, and something jolted him to actually go down back and to check something, maybe in the sanctuary lamp, to see whether it was still burning. He opened the door of the church, and the church was full of people. He looked at them and he said, "Who let you in?" There was no answer. They didn't seem to even notice him. He repeated, in a loud voice this time, "But who let you in?" Still no reaction. They were all sitting still and looking in one direction, towards the altar area. He went out and he just thought about what he'd seen, but he couldn't get to sleep. So he went back once more to see what was going on, and the church was completely empty. The following day, he went to a priest friend of his who was experienced in the things of the Spirit and explained his perplexity and what had happened step by step. The other experienced priest just quietly calmed him down and said, well, you know, it is a fact that sometimes souls in the beyond are allowed to do part of their purgatory there where they have sinned. It was probably given to you to see that there were souls in that church making up for what they had not done on earth. And if they couldn't speak, and if they couldn't move, but were all looking towards the tabernacle, it means that they were making up for the times when they weren't doing that in the house of God. They had been talking and doing other things, moving around and chatting before the Blessed Sacrament, and their purgatory was according to their fault. With that he was satisfied and doubled up his prayers for the souls in purgatory. Another time, Padre Pio was told that there was something going on in church, and it turned out that there was a apparent Franciscan young man doing all kinds of things at the altar, cleaning the brasses and doing a lot of sacristy work. But apparently, when it was checked out, that young Capuchin was long dead. So Padre Pio knew what was going on there. He was having to make up in purgatory, in the place where it hadn't happened, that they could go out and do part of it there, that care which he had not given when he was alive and had the duty to do so. Care for the things of God. Another time, not that far back now in time, because I think it's the first cousin of the person concerned. She was the one who told me, and this other cousin of hers is very balanced and a good, grounded lady of about her age, not old. What happened was this: she was piously praying actually in our own cathedral, Mullingar, and because the cathedral is big and full of pillars, the person closing the church didn't notice that there was a human being still in there. And so she heard, and she found that actually she was locked in the cathedral for the night. Well, she thought, I'll make the best of it, and she thought, well, I've got to get some kind of sleep until they open up around 7 in the morning. What can I do? So she looked around and she found a cushion in one of the confession boxes. So discreetly, she actually went into the box and dozed off on the sort of comfortable cushion. At least she could get some sleep. But it didn't stop there. Around midnight, she kind of heard or felt or sensed something going on, as it were some shuffling or activity. She poked her nose through the curtain of the confession box and was scared out of her wits. She looked towards the high altar, which is still there, and she saw, with her own eyes, a full high mass taking place, at least the movements of it, and all the figures in it, with one difference, that they were not touching the ground. She didn't know what on earth to think of it. Eventually, she managed to get some sleep again, perplexed, until they opened at 7 in the morning. But she told it to her cousin, my friend. And so I explained to them, well, that's exactly what's going on there. Obviously, some time back, there had been negligent servants of the altar, whoever they might have been, who were not behaving with the respect due in their sacred duties, and they were having to make up for it. There's actually a picture I've seen of a monk or a priest at an altar in England, I believe, an old altar, and he is apparently celebrating the sacred mysteries. Now, I'm not sure what the explanation is, but it was caught on a photo, and it would seem that something of that nature was happening there. Either that he was making reparation, or that he was some way making up for the celebrations that he hadn't celebrated while he had a duty to do so. All this to say that we're handling the beyond in the house of God, and we're acting under the beyond's rules, not our own. And when the Lord commands that these things be taken out of here, he means it. The first is the engagement of our vocal cords. In the monastic life that was very strict, because the regular places, as they're called, the refectory, the cloister, the church, the library, and so on, are places where the vocal cords must not be engaged, hence the code of signs. Well, in the same way, we protect the sacred by not invading it, and the immediate invasion is noise. Then, in the noise that we make, there's a double invasion if that noise is not for the sake of getting it right, because it's one thing to give clear instructions, it's another one to talk about the weather and the football, and that's happening, even when people have the Blessed Sacrament right in their heart. Now, give that message also to the children, and they'll cop on that there's a big difference between the house of God and the house of man. We are not free to behave in the house of God as in our own, because we're under heaven's dominion. And by the way, the angels are filling that place, especially in the altar area, and they're very upset by this stuff, this clutter, which the Lord wants us to take out of here. I conclude. The other in parallel is this. What about people not really realizing the difference between the house of God, receiving physically, worshipping together with the angels and our brethren, and looking at a screen? I'm picking up now that things are starting to happen which were not even thought about just a couple of years ago. There are people who actually can get to the sacred mysteries and opt to sit down in an armchair and view it happening. I know also one or two cases where, for one reason or another, they prefer to have Mass on Zoom with friends of theirs than when actually they can get to a church which is open. Now, this is actually subtle, because it's a habit that was never there before, not available, but you watch, it'll start happening even after the lockdown. People will prefer to stay to their comfort zone and their armchair. And what are the graces that will happen there? Well, the phone will go on and they'll stop the celebration and they'll answer the phone. They might even have a cup of coffee next to them. Somebody will come in and they'll talk about something. What is the concentration there? And all the graces missed, compared with coming to the house of God and the whole throng of angels, of which the hymns that we're using today speak eloquently.